Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Mama V, your number one shop plug for gist. If this is your first time of seeing my channel, do well to subscribe to get more updates from us. Thank you guys and God bless you.
To jama'a wannan dai da kuke ganin jirgi ne wanda gashi nan a kasa dai mu dai a garin Bauchi zagaya mu yake wanda ba mu san mu ce ga nufin su ba mu san menene yake zagaya mu.
For the first time in nearly 20 years, the persecutors are smelling. And it's just beginning. All those who make others to mourn, they will mourn. All those who slaughter the children of others, their own will be slaughtered. Judgment has begun. Judgment has begun. For the first time, the persecutor is now becoming the persecuted. Give God thanks for stepping in, as he said. Nigeria will not be the same anymore.
The United States has resumed intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance flights over northeast Nigeria. And this development signals one thing very clearly. The war against terrorism in Nigeria is entering a long and decisive phase. This is no longer a short-term intervention. This is sustained pressure, and for terrorist groups operating across Nigeria's forests and border corridors, the message is unmistakable. There will be no breathing space. According to open source intelligence tracking and flight monitoring data, U.S. surveillance aircraft have returned to Nigerian airspace, focusing heavily on militant activity in the Sambisa forest and surrounding areas in Borno State. This renewed activity comes just days after reported airstrikes targeting ISIS-linked fighters in Sokoto State, an operation that appears to have triggered a broader security recalibration. The disclosure came from Sahel-focused terrorism tracker Brant Phillip, who shared flight tracking data showing a U.S. aircraft conducting operations over Borno. The aircraft in question was identified as a Gulfstream 5, a long-range jet frequently modified for ISR missions, capable of persistent surveillance, signals intelligence, and battlefield mapping over vast territories. What makes this particularly significant is not just the flight itself, but the pattern. According to analysts, the United States resumed these ISR operations after only a one-day pause following the Sokoto airstrikes. That pause appears procedural, not strategic. In other words, this was not a withdrawal, it was a reset. Phillip further explained that the surveillance mission was focused on ISWAP, the Islamic State West Africa province, the ISIS affiliate that has entrenched itself across Nigeria's northeast and the Lake Chad basin. ISWAP is not a fringe group. It is one of the most organized and adaptive jihadist networks in West Africa, known for exploiting weak governance, local grievances, and cross-border sanctuaries. Flight tracking records reviewed by open-source analysts reveal something even more telling. The U.S. began its current cycle of ISR missions over Nigeria as far back as November 24th, with aircraft taking off from Ghana, a key logistics hub for American military operations in West Africa. Since then, the same aircraft linked to Tenax Aerospace, a U.S. special mission aircraft provider, has reportedly flown over Nigerian territory almost daily. This is sustained surveillance, not symbolic, not experimental. Sources familiar with the operation indicate that these flights are aimed at monitoring militant movements and tracking broader security threats, including the reported kidnapping of an American pilot in neighboring Niger Republic. That alone expands the strategic stakes. Once American citizens are involved, surveillance intensity tends to increase, not decrease. The renewed U.S. activity also comes weeks after Nigeria's National Security Advisor, Malam Nuhu Ribadu, met with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Washington. That meeting occurred amid growing tensions following public warnings by U.S. President Donald Trump about potential military intervention if Nigeria failed to curb jihadist violence, particularly attacks framed as religiously motivated. Following that meeting, Hegseth stated that the United States would work aggressively with Nigeria to end what he described as the persecution of Christians by jihadist terrorists. Days later, airstrikes were reported. Now, surveillance flights have resumed. This sequence matters. What we are witnessing is not an isolated operation. It is a campaign. And for terrorist groups operating in Nigeria, this changes everything. Now, beyond the official disclosures and flight tracking data, there is a far more damning layer to this story. One that exposes not just failure of the government, but gross negligence and institutional cowardice within Nigeria itself. According to independent findings and credible local accounts, terrorist groups had already begun digging boreholes deep inside forest enclaves in Sokoto State.
They've been here since 2018 and they've been disrupting the livestock of people. That is what they specialize in rustling animals. But with this attack, this bombardment from the U.S. government on Christmas Day, the villagers really confirmed that, the U.S. airstrike hit the target because they could confirm that people are moving from Kauri, Kandam, Malgam, where the Lakura have their base, and even are very, very comfortable digging a borehole and even a well to make it a permanent camp. That particular place has been hit by this attack. Yeah.
Just to interrupt you, well, I think that's one of the revelations from this. We're talking about how much development they say have taken place in some of these settlements in the forest. They talk about boreholes being built.
Exactly.
Talk about wells being dug by terrorists.
Yeah.
And then who indeed come out to cause commotion, cause problems, make it difficult for the people to indeed, have a normal lifestyle, rear cattle, steal, kidnap, and of course go away.
Exactly. They waited until your farm produce are ready for harvest, and they start coming. Either they kidnap and to ask you to sell your farm produce. And in most instances, this farm produce, you have to pay levy to harvest. And after you pay levy, they also come for you. They kidnap the breadwinners in the home, and they know you cannot allow your father or your breadwinners to be with them. You have to pay. So the community here have suffered a lot.
Boreholes. Permanent water infrastructure. This was not a hide-and-run operation. This was settlement, an intention to stay, expand, and rule territory indefinitely. And here is the part that should outrage every Nigerian. The villagers knew. Local communities were aware that armed groups were digging boreholes, establishing camps, and preparing for long-term occupation. This was happening in plain sight, not in some unreachable jungle, not in a war zone cut off from civilization, but in areas with human presence, communication, and authority structures. So the question is no longer whether the government failed. The real question is how much failure was tolerated. How does a terrorist group dig boreholes, settle permanently, and entrench itself while state authorities remain silent? Security agencies issue no urgent warnings. Political leaders say nothing. Traditional institutions, whose voices carry enormous influence, look the other way. And yes, this includes the Sultan of Sokoto. Silence at that level is not neutral. It is consequential. Whether driven by fear, political calculation, or sheer institutional paralysis, the failure to raise alarm or apply pressure as terrorists settled into forests is indefensible. History does not judge silence kindly when blood eventually follows. This is the point where frustration turns into justified anger. For years, Nigerians have watched terrorist groups evolve in slow motion. What started as scattered attacks became organized raids. Raids became camps. Camps became communities. Forests turned into operational headquarters. And at every stage, the response lagged. Late, cautious, and insufficient. This is why US surveillance and air operations now feel less like assistance and more like an exposure of national shame. Not because foreign involvement is wrong, but because it highlights how far Nigeria allowed this crisis to rot before external pressure forced action. When terrorists plan permanent settlements and nobody intervenes, it becomes impossible to argue that the state is fully in control. And when that perception takes hold, authority collapses, whether officials admit it or not. Then there is the part nobody wants to confront honestly. Terrorism has become a business model. A state governor publicly admitted spending billions of naira on rehabilitating terrorists. Billions. Yet there is no matching urgency, funding, or political will to rebuild the communities those same terrorists destroyed. Villages were burned, farms were abandoned, families were scattered, lives were permanently altered. Millions of Nigerians remain trapped in IDP camps, unable to return home safely. No clear reconstruction plan, no mass resettlement, no guarantee of security, just endless survival. So what message does that send? That picking up a gun gets you rehabilitation funds faster than being a victim gets you justice. That violence attracts resources. That suffering attracts silence. This is why resentment is spreading. This is why trust is collapsing. Because when violence is rewarded quicker than victimhood is repaired, the system loses moral authority. At this stage, terrorism no longer looks like a crisis being solved. It looks like an industry being managed. Fighters are rehabilitated. Budgets are approved. Committees are formed. Conferences are held. Meanwhile, the forests remain occupied. The supply lines remain intact. And impunity remains untouched. So yes, as US surveillance and pressure intensify, propaganda will follow. Accusations of foreign interference, claims of sovereignty violation, attempts to discredit American operations. That script is predictable, but facts do not bend to narratives. Terrorist groups did not entrench themselves because of US drones. They entrenched themselves because of years of silence, negotiation without enforcement, and selective accountability within Nigeria. Surveillance exposes what dialogue hides. It maps routes, identifies leaders, tracks logistics, reveals sanctuaries. And once a network is fully mapped, it stops being mysterious. It becomes vulnerable. That is why terrorists fear drones more than dialogue. Nigeria is now at a crossroads it delayed for far too long. Either domestic security structures finally align with this pressure and dismantle these networks decisively, or Nigeria accepts the humiliation of becoming a permanent theater where foreign powers do what local systems refuse to do. That choice is no longer theoretical. As surveillance resumes and pressure tightens, one truth stands. The era of comfortable concealment is ending. Those who dug boreholes, planned settlements, and believed the forest belonged to them indefinitely are about to learn a hard lesson. There is no permanent cover. There is no silence without consequence. And no hiding place left. Not anymore.